Hi, Kelly. This really is a great work. Let's see. Something that strikes me here is there's a little white border on the left and top, and I would like you to go back and just doctor that before you include it in your portfolio. Generally, it's not something you'd notice right away. However, I'm always putting your files on a gray background when I can manage that so that you can see exactly how the edges look. Another thing, I really do enjoy these shapes, and the composition is so lively and fun and varied and interesting. I'm wondering, though, for instance, about a blue, what I'll call a splat in the lower right area, and I'm just thinking about how that looks like it is a splat on glass in front of the rest of the scene. In other words, the splat is not wrapping around the magenta shape that we see it on top of. Just a thought, something that you might try messing around with in future. However, I do like this and I think it's quite good as is. Hi, Nicole. Your work, it is so successful. It's lovely to see what you are able to accomplish. And I reviewed your work from week 5, and your understanding of the harmony here is quite complete. And the whole design has been tightened down. I like the use of the frame, a frame that reminds me a little bit of a favorite toy, an Etch-a-Sketch. Hi, Yolanda. I didn't see your statement in there. I can guess that this is intended to be a monochrome color harmony, and I like the way that you've added a frame here and the sort of soft marble quality to the areas on the exterior of the imagery. Now, about the imagery, you do have a significant file resolution issue, and it looks like artifacts to me. And I just want to let you know that, when you go back to revise a file, it's very important to go back to the native file. That's the PSD or the AI. And be sure to save your native file in high resolution. That would be 300 pixels per inch. You can always reduce the file size by making a copy or saving for web, but when it comes time to go back and continue work on the art to revise, for example, from what you had in week 5 to what you needed for week 6, you need to use the native file. Hi, Carmela. I know you were struggling with a resolution issue, and I do think your file is passable. Perhaps there's still a little bit of trouble there from what I can see. However, when I compare what you have in terms of composition now versus what you had in week 5, I am so pleased. I find this to be a delightful design that is quite sophisticated. If there was anything to change, it might be the backgrounds of the daisies or stars on the right. That row on the right, they seem to have white backgrounds, and those stand out quite a lot compared to the 2 vertical rows at left and center. Hi, Crystal. Your design, it reminds me of autumn. I'm thinking of, I don't know, fruits like persimmons that fall on the ground, and pine cone-like seed pods from other sorts of trees. I can see that you were able to toy with stroke and change its color. Also, you've added borders here. I would check the top border. It looks like it's a little thicker, and I'd say for portfolio presentation, you'd like the border to be even all the way around. There is a tradition of putting a little more border on bottom with framing art. However, I don't think that's so necessary with digital files. One thing I would say is, I wonder about that central brownish star shape and the colors behind it. I think it'd be a nice idea to try to manage colors so that you don't have brown on brown, even if they are separated by an orange stroke. Craig, this is a really delightful design that you've come up with, and I know it's been through many versions and a lot of change in week 5 too. I love the way it dances, the way it suggests a game, sort of like a video game maybe, and it has a quality of being cyber, which makes it contemporary, and also a nice design to be presented as a digital one. If I had any critique of this, it might have to do with the central area where we see more of that pea green color, and the 2 bottommost corners there, both having a red shape that looks a little like an arrow. Because those two shapes are both on bottom and there aren't mirroring shapes on top, it feels a little bottom heavy, or the sort of quirky quasi symmetry seems just a little bit off. I don't know how you'd manage changing that, because it seems like you do have a system here, but it's just food for thought, something to think about. Hi, Michelle. Like many of your classmates, you've done a good job narrating how you worked with the software here, and it's fascinating to see the different tools and methods that you did put to use in the creation of this work, which has come a long way, and your enthusiasm for your projects is evident here too. Now, when I take a close look at this file, I'm just wondering if, in some cases, placement could be a little more exacting. Also, in matters like, say, the two stars. Let's look at the two stars at top. One of them is a little skinnier. It looks like it got stretched or squashed a bit. If you take one and copy and paste it, you should be able to have an identical one in the second position. And speaking of positions, I'm looking toward the bottom, and in the center there are two sort of hex sign designs with cyan tinted backgrounds. If you take a close look at that, you'll notice that one is closer to that bunch of outside shapes and the other one's a little farther away. And there, maybe using the grid or guides would help you. Additionally, the two cyan squares at top might be directly over the ones at bottom. Hi, Kathy. I enjoyed reading about your process. The process by which you arrived at your final project, and I'm looking at this in comparison to your week 5 work, and I know things have come a long way. You should be very proud, along with your classmates, of what you guys have produced. Really, the group of work that was made for your class's final project stands out as a really solid, nice array. Hi, Israel. Like Kathy, I can see that you have a great reverence for nature, and I like the way that you talk about nature with regard to a specific locale, your home state, Maine. I think that the central aspect of your design is very lovely. It's solid and thought out. It's taught. Things have been adjusted until everything feels like it's in the very right place. Thank you for labeling it as analogous. I still feel as though analogous is a little bit of a stretch, because we don't have a green between the cyan and the yellow that's prominent in the design. One thing I'll say is I appreciate that you've made the text larger so that the name of your company is evident and legible. However, I don't feel that this is the right text or the right placement for the design that you created. The design stands out as being strong, and I think you can probably come up with perhaps an even better text edition. Hi, Jacinthia. Thank you for narrating your thought process with regard to your work. When I take a look at your final project and compare it to what you had in week 5, it seems as though it hasn't changed that much. However, I do notice that in week 5 you elaborated on this one that you ultimately chose. Now, a couple of little flaws here that I want you to think about and perhaps adjust before including this in your portfolio include a little smidge of white in the upper left-hand corner, and also notice when I put this on gray here for the review, you can see that there's a large white margin. Perhaps that is where your color wheel was, and that should be cropped out for use in your portfolio. Now, what I want to say in addition is the second file that you have posted is very nice to see. I'm interested to observe the two together, because they do feel as though they were created by the same artist and they begin to make a set. Likewise, before including that in your portfolio, you might like to trim off the white.